You are welcome to Gospel Oracle. In this captivating exploration, we delve into the biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah, the notorious cities steeped in wickedness. Shortly after God made a covenant with Abraham, Genesis 18 recounts how the Lord personally visited Abraham. This visit took the form of three men, who appeared near the great trees of Mamre, close to Abraham's home. Abraham recognized these men as more than mere travelers. He saw them as a physical manifestation of God himself. Excitedly, he rushed out of his tent to greet them, offering hospitality by washing their feet and providing food for their journey. Although the three men never explicitly introduced themselves as God, Abraham seemed to have a higher understanding of their divine nature. His eagerness to cater to these strangers was uncommon for the time. Some interpretations suggest that these men were angels sent by God, or perhaps two of them were angels while the third was God himself. In Genesis 19, when the three men entered Sodom, they further confirmed Abraham's theory. They spoke of Sarah, declaring that she would give birth to a son by next year. This reinforced God's promise and even included a specific time frame, a welcome gesture for a man who had waited most of his life for this moment. An interesting detail often overlooked is Sarah's reaction. Despite being well past childbearing age, she didn't respond with elated joy like Abraham. Instead, she almost cynically questioned whether she could now experience the pleasure of having a child after feeling worn out and with her husband advanced in years. In the Bible, Sarah is described as laughing when she hears the promise that she will have a child. Perhaps she wasn't entirely convinced of the Lord's promises, especially considering her old age. The idea of having a child seemed not only ludicrous but also inconvenient for Sarah. After all, she was around 100 years old. God, however, doesn't take her laughter lightly. He questions Abraham, asking why Sarah laughed and whether she truly believed in a promise that seemed impossible to fulfill. Before Abraham can respond, God reiterates that he will return in a year, and Sarah will indeed have a son. Overhearing this exchange, Sarah responds in fear. She denies laughing, but God ominously insists that she did. The three men then leave, heading toward Sodom, while Abraham walks with them. Interestingly, God seems to deliberate with himself. He wonders whether he should hide his plans from Abraham. This deliberation is unusual, as God typically acts without hesitation. Some interpret this as God sharing his thoughts with us, the readers, rather than seeking our input. God's decision to reveal the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah serves a purpose. He wants to prepare Abraham for the burdens of leadership, as he intends to make Abraham a great and mighty nation. The sin in those cities is so grievous that God will personally investigate its severity. In this passage, we learn that the offenses committed by Sodom and Gomorrah are so severe that they warrant a direct visit from God. It seems that God had already heard about the situation in these cities from multiple sources, and it greatly disturbed him. Although God already knows what is happening, he chooses to go down and see for himself. This action demonstrates his thoroughness when it comes to delivering judgment. Before nuking the city, God ensures that they have truly violated his rules. Meanwhile, three men make their way into Sodom, but Abraham remains standing before the Lord. He boldly challenges God's plan and integrity, asking whether he would sweep away the righteous along with the wicked. Abraham even negotiates with God, proposing that if there are 50 righteous people in the city, it should be spared. Abraham's audacity in questioning the Lord reflects his deep understanding of God's nature and principles. He believes that God, as the most righteous judge, cannot make an unjust decision. Abraham is dismayed at the idea of God destroying a city without first rescuing those who have done no wrong. His compassion extends even to strangers in Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham's efforts to intercede with God are remarkably successful. God humors Abraham's request, assuring him that if he finds just 50 righteous people in Sodom, he will spare the entire city. This interaction demonstrates that God does indeed listen to prayers and grants people the opportunity to change his mind. But Abraham, the smooth talker, doesn't stop there. He bargains with God, asking if the number could be reduced to 45 righteous people. Surprisingly, God agrees. Abraham pushes his luck further, proposing 40 righteous people, and once again, God acquiesces. In the end, Abraham negotiates God down to a mere 10 righteous people. Some see Abraham as an excellent negotiator, convincing God of anything. Others believe that God didn't truly want to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, seeking any excuse to spare innocent lives. Perhaps God was testing Abraham's leadership capacity and compassion. Regardless, Abraham's humility, acknowledging his insignificance, played a crucial role in these negotiations. God likely knew there wouldn't be 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, so his agreement with Abraham wasn't due to Abraham's negotiation skills. Instead, God was determined to do as he pleased. Genesis 19, aptly named Sodom and Gomorrah Destroyed, reveals that there were no innocent souls to be found in the cities, hence God's decision to nuke them. The perspective shifts from Abraham to his nephew Lot, who lived in Sodom. Lot sat at the city gate when he saw 2 angels, likely 2 of the men Abraham had greeted. He responded similarly to Abraham, bowing low before them. Lot recognized their divinity and eagerly offered them hospitality. Although we don't know if they had visible wings, their distinguished aura struck Lot. Despite the angels' initial refusal, Lot insisted they stay at his house, and eventually, they agreed. According to the Bible, Lot persistently convinced the angels to go with him. However, his persistence wasn't solely about offering them hospitality, it was also for their safety. As a resident of Sodom, Lot knew the city's sinfulness well. He anticipated that the men would come seeking the visitors, who were strikingly different. Recognizing Lot's urgency, the angels agreed to accompany him, perhaps to humor him since the mere men of Sodom posed no real threat. Lot prepared a meal for them, and they intended to rest. But word had spread about the 2 handsome visitors, and soon, the angels were tracked down to Lot's house. Before they could retire, a disturbance arose. All the men from every part of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded Lot's house. They demanded that Lot bring out the visitors so they could have sexual relations with them. These men not only disregarded hospitality principles but also showed a complete lack of morality, driven solely by their desire for satisfaction, regardless of who the visitors were. Indeed, the account of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible portrays a disturbing scene. The men of Sodom, driven by their sinful desires, surround Lot's house, demanding to have sexual relations with the 2 angels who had arrived in the form of men. Their actions reveal a complete disregard for hospitality and morality. Lot, in an attempt to protect the angels, offers his daughters instead, an appalling choice, even in the face of such wickedness. While the men of Sodom demonstrate alarming behavior, Lot's willingness to sacrifice his daughters is equally troubling. During the time when this story unfolds, societal norms placed women in a lower position. In the context of hospitality, guests were to be protected at all costs, even at the expense of one's own family. So, when Lot offered his daughters to the mob, it might not have been seen as an outrageous act. However, it remains a troubling moment. Lot, in a desperate attempt to save 2 strangers he didn't even know, compromised his daughter's innocence by suggesting they be handed over. The mob, however, paid no attention to Lot's moral perspective. They ridiculed him, dismissing his words as those of a foreigner. Despite his efforts, they remained unyielding. Perhaps Lot's willingness to sacrifice his daughters only agitated them further, as they had no respect for him or his plea. Furthermore, Lot's efforts to pacify the mob only draw their attention toward him. They inform him that after they have had their way with the visitors, they will take him next. However, the angels intervene, pulling Lot back inside the house. Before the advancing mob, the angels strike the men with blindness. Turning to Lot, the angels inquire about anyone else in the city, sons-in-law, sons, or daughters, who belong to him. They urge him to get them out of there because God has decided to destroy the place. Despite the disturbing context, the angels recognize Lot as a pious man, despite his willingness to sacrifice his daughters. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Lot immediately seeks to save his loved ones. He approaches his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters, urging them to leave the city. Unfortunately, they dismiss his warning, assuming he is joking, and do not go with him. In the morning, the angels urgently urged Lot to leave because destruction was imminent. This suggests that Lot had spent time trying to save people or convince them that God would destroy the city, but unfortunately, most reacted like his sons-in-law, either laughing him off or dismissing him as crazy. In the end, Lot left with only his wife and 2 daughters, just 4 people, in contrast to Abraham's hopeful 10. We gain insight into Lot's thought process. Perhaps he didn't want to leave Sodom entirely. His hesitation is evident, and the angels took action when he lingered. They grasped Lot, his wife, and his daughters by the hand, leading them safely out of the city. The Lord's mercy was upon them, even as Lot struggled with leaving behind a place that held a piece of his heart. The exact reason for his hesitation remains unclear, but some speculate that he wanted to save his sons-in-law or neighbors. Others suggest that doubt crept in as he questioned the visitor's words. Regardless, the angels physically guided Lot out of the city. Notice that the angels take charge, grasping not only Lot's hand but also those of his family, leading them out of the city. It's as if they didn't trust Lot to go alone or believed he might linger in Sodom. Perhaps, as compensation for his earlier hospitality, the angels ensured his safe exit. Once outside the city, the angels issue a critical command to Lot and his family: flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Head to the mountains, or you'll be swept away. But Lot hesitates. He tells the angels that he can't flee to the mountains because disaster would overtake him, and he'd die there. Instead, Lot proposes an alternative, a nearby small town called Zoar. He pleads with the angels to spare it. His hesitation suggests that he doubted whether the angels or God truly knew what they were doing regarding Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction. Perhaps he thought it was all a mistake. Without Sodom, he'd have no home, just the mountains, which wouldn't be comfortable. So, he sought to secure a place in Zoar. After the destruction had taken place, the angels agreed to Lot's request. They waited for him to be on his way to Zoar before executing their plan. In Genesis 19 verses 24 to 25, the account describes how the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the heavens, overthrowing those cities and the entire plain. Everything, both people and vegetation, was destroyed. You'll recall that in Genesis 19 verse 17, the angels advised Lot and his family to flee for their lives without looking back. However, Lot's wife defied this command and turned to look back. As a consequence of her disobedience, she was turned into a pillar of salt. The reasons behind Lot's wife's punishment have sparked various theories. Some suggest that her act of looking back symbolized sympathy for those being destroyed, despite their wickedness. Others believe it represented her attachment to her old life, regretting what she was leaving behind. Ultimately, her disobedience serves as a metaphor for our human impulses. Sometimes even when given clear instructions, curiosity or attachment can lead us astray. Echoing the story of Adam and Eve, Lot's wife disobeys the angels' instructions and looks back as they flee from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. As a consequence, she is turned into a pillar of salt. The next morning, Abraham stands where he had spoken to God the day before. He gazes toward Sodom and Gomorrah, but all he sees is dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. This event serves as a powerful reminder for believers. It showcases God's immeasurable strength, capable of decimating entire cities without leaving a trace of civilization. Abraham's gratitude for God's rescue of his nephew, Lot, underscores the importance of recognizing God's mercy. In the closing chapter of Genesis 19, we find Lot and his daughters living in a cave in the mountains. Despite bargaining with the angels to flee to Zoar instead of the mountains, Lot ends up in the mountains anyway. His daughters realize that staying in the cave means they won't meet men and won't be able to carry on their family's legacy through childbirth. One night, Lot's oldest daughter decides to get her father drunk until he is unaware of his surroundings. In this incapacitated state, she has sex with him and becomes pregnant. The next night, the younger daughter does the same and is also impregnated. Throughout these events, Lot seems to have no recollection of what took place. The Bible states that both daughters successfully give birth. The older daughter names her son Moab, who becomes the ancestor of the Moabites. The younger daughter names her son Ben-Ammi, who becomes the ancestor of the Ammonites. This chapter concludes with an uncomfortable and morally questionable situation, two daughters essentially seducing and raping their own father. Ironically, Lot's drunkenness facilitates the same shameful act he had condemned in the mob of Sodom. The story highlights the complexities of human behavior, with characters demonstrating both good and bad traits. Lot offers his daughters to the mob, Lot's wife disobeys God's angels, and the men of Sodom are portrayed as villains. Feel free to share your opinions on the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and your interpretations of each character in the comments below. Thanks for watching till this end. Kindly subscribe, like and share to reach more people with amazing teachings of the Bible. Stay blessed.